For nearly 50 years, she was a constant, comforting presence on country music's most famous stage. Her voice, a clarion call of heartache and resilience, echoed through the Grand Ole Opry, earning her the title of one of its grand ladies. But behind the microphone, Jan Howard's life was a testament to the deepest human sorrows. Seriously, if you wrote her story as fiction, people would say it was too unbelievable, too relentlessly tragic to be true. From the unimaginable loss of 3 children to enduring horrific abuse and a brush with suicide, this is the story of a woman who didn't just sing about pain. She lived it, survived it, and transformed it into art. This is the story of Johnny. Howard's tragic resilience, the story of an Opry widow who simply refused to be broken. She was born Lula Grace Johnson on March 13, 1929, in West Plains, Missouri, right as the Great Depression began to sink its teeth into America. As one of 11 children in an impoverished farm family, her early life was defined by a hardship that's difficult for most of us to even imagine. The Johnson family was always on the move, following her brick mason father from one job to the next, creating a childhood of constant instability. Lula Grace's education at a one-room schoolhouse was sporadic at best. She often wore clothes made from feed sacks, a common and humbling sign of rural poverty back then. Food was so scarce that at one point she worked as a dishwasher in a local cafe where the owner couldn't pay her in cash, giving her family food for their weekly meals instead. But poverty wasn't the darkest shadow in her youth. In her stunning 1987 autobiography, Sunshine and Shadow, Howard revealed a trauma she had carried in secret for decades. At just 8 years old, she was raped by a family friend. It was a brutal act of violence that shattered her innocence and would echo for the rest of her life, planting the seeds of severe anxiety and depression that would bloom in her adult years. As a girl, her only real escape was music. She'd huddle by the radio with her father, listening to the Grand Ole Opry and dreaming of singers like Texas Ruby, never once imagining that the hallowed stage would one day become her home. Jan Howard's life was a soap opera, a fact she herself would later acknowledge with a wry laugh. Her romantic life didn't begin with joy, but with a grim sense of duty. At only 16, she was pushed into marrying a man named Merle Wood. She didn't want to marry him, but felt cornered by her mother into accepting his proposal. Looking back, she wrote with haunting clarity, I felt like I was dressing for a funeral, and in a way, I was. The funeral of my girlhood. She dropped out of high school and began the life of a military wife. Before she even turned 20, she had 3 sons, Jimmy, Carter, and David. The marriage was a nightmare. The young family moved constantly, following Wood's work from Missouri to Arkansas, Colorado to Kansas. The instability was terrifying. During one move, their house in Greeley, Colorado caught fire. Jan woke to the smell of smoke and, with her husband nowhere to be found, managed to save her 3 young children by herself. But the chaos was compounded by cruelty. In her book, Howard detailed the physical abuse she suffered at his hands, a pattern that only got worse over their 8-year marriage. The violence hit its peak when he held a butcher knife to her throat. That was it. That same day, she fled with her 3 boys, escaping with her family's help to Oklahoma. The divorce was finalized in 1953, but her habit of choosing the wrong men wasn't over. While living with her brother, she met and quickly married Lowell, Smitty Smith, another military man. They settled into what looked like a normal suburban life, and Jan even got a job in a department store tea room. But this calm was shattered by 2 devastating blows. First, she gave birth to a daughter, Janet Louise, who was born with severe medical problems and died shortly after birth. Then, in 1955, she made a shocking discovery. Her husband was a bigamist, already married to another woman. The marriage was annulled, and once again, Jan was alone with her 3 sons, her life in ruins. This string of betrayals, abuse, infidelity, bigamy would have been enough to destroy most people. But for Lula Grace Johnson, it was a trial by fire. Facing total destitution, she made a decision that would change the course of her life and the landscape of country music forever. She packed up her kids and what little they owned and boarded a bus for Los Angeles, determined to start over. She was done being a victim of her circumstances. She was becoming a survivor. In Los Angeles, Jan worked grueling jobs as a waitress and a secretary to support her sons. Life was a daily struggle, but it was in California that fate finally showed up. In 1957, she had a chance meeting with an ambitious, charismatic, and ridiculously talented songwriter named Harlan Howard. The connection was immediate and intense. Just 1 month after they met, they drove to Las Vegas and got married. For the first time, Jan had a partner who saw something in her she hadn't yet seen in herself. Harlan legally adopted her 3 sons, and for a while it seemed she'd finally found the stability she'd been searching for. Her entry into the music business was a complete accident. She had zero ambition to be a singer. The stage fright that would plague her for years was crippling, and she was painfully shy about her voice. But one evening, while she was washing dishes and singing softly to herself, Harlan walked in, stopped, dead in his tracks, and truly heard her for the first time. He was stunned. He recognized the raw, honest, and powerful quality in her voice, a voice shaped by a life of hardship. He knew, right then and there, that she had a gift. Harlan started, coaxing her to record demo tapes of his songs. They'd turn their bathroom into a makeshift studio because of its natural echo. Jan was reluctant, but she did it to help his career. She sang the demo for a song called "Mommy for a Day," which became a hit for Kitty Wells. She also recorded the original demo for one of the most iconic country songs of all time, "I Fall to Pieces," which would become a career-defining smash for her friend, Patsy Cline. Jan Howard was, in essence, the first voice to bring these legendary songs to life. Harlan kept pushing. She began recording under the name Jan Howard, suggested by her record label, and released a few songs, including duets with Wynn Stewart. Then, in 1960, came the breakthrough. She recorded a Harlan Howard tune called "The One You Slip Around With." It was a perfect fit for her direct, no-nonsense delivery. It climbed into the top 10, and suddenly, Jan Howard was a star. She was named Most Promising Country Female Artist by both Billboard and Cashbox. That same year, with Harlan's songwriting career exploding, the Howards moved to the epicenter of country music, Nashville, Tennessee. Jan made her debut on the Grand Ole Opry, the very show she'd listened to as a girl in a feed sack dress. But success brought its own demons. Her stage fright was so bad it often left her doubled over in fear before a show. Her weight dropped to a dangerous 97 pounds, and the trauma of her youth resurfaced with a vengeance. Harlan, concerned and at a loss, had her briefly institutionalized. She was diagnosed with a heart condition and urged to seek counseling. She was a woman on the rise, but she was also a woman on the edge, battling demons that fame couldn't erase. The 1960s in Nashville were a whirlwind for Jan Howard. She and Harlan were a power couple at the heart of the city's creative scene, owning a publishing company and churning out hits. But Jan wasn't just singing Harlan's songs anymore. She was becoming a respected songwriter in her own right. She penned the 1966 hit "It's All Over But the Crying" for Kitty Wells, and later wrote major hits for Bill Anderson and Connie Smith. Her solo career was on fire. Her songs weren't like the demure, sweet-tempered tunes of many female country singers of the day. Jan was direct, tough, and sang with an unvarnished honesty that resonated with a whole generation of women. She was stylish and no frills, bringing a feminine spunk to the Nashville sound. This came through in her string of gutsy, assertive hits, "What Makes a Man Wonder," "Bad Seed," and "Roll Over and Play Dead." Then, in 1966, she recorded what would become her signature anthem, "Evil on Your Mind." Written by Harlan, the song was a sharp, biting warning to a cheating partner, delivered with Jan's trademark vocal power. It was a massive top 5 hit that cemented her status as one of country music's top female vocalists, later included in the definitive book, Heartaches by the Number, the 500 Greatest Country Music Singles. Her career hit another peak when she teamed up with fellow Opry star Bill Anderson. Their voices blended perfectly, and they became one of the hottest duos in country music. They scored a string of hits, including the massive #1 single, For Loving You, in 1967, which stayed at the top for 4 weeks. They even co-wrote the hit, I Never Once Stopped Loving You, for Connie Smith. On stage, Jan Howard was a queen. She was a celebrated artist, and in March 1971, she was officially inducted as a member of the Grand Ole Opry, a childhood dream fully realized. But, behind the curtain, her perfect life with Harlan was unraveling. It turned out many of the heartache and infidelity songs she was singing were pulled directly from her own troubled marriage. The pressure of their careers and Harlan's cheating finally fractured their relationship. She caught him, and in 1968, their 11-year marriage, the very partnership that had launched her career, was over. For the first time, Jan's singing wasn't just a passion, it was how she would survive. She was a single mother again, famous this time, but facing an uncertain future. The dream she had built in Nashville had crumbled. The greatest tragedies, however, were still to come. The late 1960s were a turbulent time in America, largely due to the war in Vietnam. For Jan Howard, this distant conflict was about to become deeply, horribly personal. In 1968, her oldest son, Jimmy, a college student, was drafted. When his brother Carter heard the news, he immediately volunteered to enlist too, telling his mother, "If Jimmy's going, I'm going." Through friends, Jan managed to get Jimmy a 21-day leave to come home before he deployed, a precious final visit. Like any mother with a child in a war zone, Jan was consumed with worry. She wrote to Jimmy constantly. One night, she was writing a letter that felt different. The words just flowed out of her, a raw and desperate prayer for his safety. She read it to Carter, who was home on leave. He was so moved, he told her, "Mom, you need to put that to music." She showed the letter to her duet partner, Bill Anderson, who agreed. With legendary producer Owen Bradley, she went into the studio to record it. The session was agonizing. Jan was so overcome with emotion she couldn't get through the song without breaking down. She told Bradley she couldn't do it. He gently replied, "If you can sing it through one time, we'll take that, whatever it is." The final recording, titled My Son, wasn't a song, but a recitation, the unvarnished prayer of a mother, her voice trembling with love and fear over a somber musical background. The words captured the universal terror of a parent sending a child to war. It seems only yesterday that the most important thing on your mind was whether you'd make the baseball team. And now you're so very far away. I pray that you come home to me, my son. She hesitated to release it, but realized other parents could make the prayer their own. In November 1968, My Son was released. Jan sent a tape of the recording to Jimmy in Vietnam. A fellow soldier later wrote to her, telling her that on the day he died, Jimmy had proudly played the tape for his entire unit. Just 2 weeks after the song's release, Jan was at home when she saw several friends walking up to her front door. She knew instantly why they were there. Her deepest fear was now a reality. She began to scream. Private First Class James Van Howard had been killed in action. The song, once a prayer for his return, was now a memorial. It became a top 15 hit and a Grammy-nominated single, but the success was meaningless. Jan was plunged into a black hole of despair. The days and weeks that followed were a blur. She couldn't eat or sleep and relied on pills to get through the day. "I was crying when I woke up and crying when I went to sleep," she wrote. More than 5,000 letters poured in from soldiers and their families, sharing their own pain and telling her how much the song meant to them. But the song that connected her to so many was a wound she couldn't bear to touch. For the rest of her life, she was almost never able to perform My Son live. She had become a gold star mother, a member of a club no one ever wants to join. Jimmy's death sent Jan Howard into a tailspin of grief from which she might never recover. The joy of performing was gone, replaced by a constant gnawing pain. But the cruelty of fate wasn't finished. 4 years after losing Jimmy in Vietnam, tragedy struck again, this time in a way that was perhaps even more incomprehensible. In 1972, her youngest son David took his own life. He was only 21 years old. David was a talented young man, a singer, dancer, and actor who performed at the Opryland theme park. His suicide was a devastating blow that compounded her already immense sorrow. She had now outlived 2 of her 3 sons, each lost to a different kind of war. One on a foreign battlefield, the other in his own mind. She was utterly shattered. She stayed in bed for days, unable to face the world. When she finally found the strength, she methodically cleaned out David's room and sold his car. In a heartbreaking passage, she wrote, "When everything was done, I took one last look around, walked out, and closed the door on the past. But it would never be locked." Having also lost her infant daughter years before, she had now buried 3 of her 4 children. It was a weight of grief that is almost impossible to fathom. Depressed and broken, she nearly gave up her career. She entered yet another abusive relationship, continuing a lifelong destructive pattern. Her life was a blur of pain, and she began to lose the will to live. The shadows that had haunted her since childhood were threatening to consume her completely. The breaking point came in 1979. While visiting a friend in Florida, she walked to the edge of the ocean, fully intending to walk in and never come back. "It was a very bad time in my life," she later admitted. "I didn't know whether I was going to walk into the ocean or not. And I can't swim." She was standing on the precipice, ready to let the darkness win. It was in this desperate moment that salvation came from her friends in the music community, especially Johnny Cash and June Carter. They saw her pain and refused to let her go. They coaxed her back from the brink, taking her on the road with them and making her part of their show. She sang backup for Cash, and this is where the famous, and likely apocryphal, story comes. From that, it was her distinct voice adding the low "Mama sang tenor" line on the hit Daddy sang bass. Later, Tammy Wynette also hired Jan for her tour, keeping her connected to the music and community that was her only real family. This compassion was a lifeline. Jan later said she began writing her autobiography, Sunshine and Shadow, as a form of therapy. Putting her entire story on paper was a way of confronting her demons and finally beginning to heal. Jan Howard's story is a powerful reminder of the hidden battles that so many people face. If you have been moved by her resilience, please subscribe for more stories about the legends of country music. And in the comments below, share your favorite Jan Howard song or a memory of how her music has touched your life. In the aftermath of her darkest years, Jan Howard didn't just survive, she endured. And in that endurance, she found a new purpose. She became the living embodiment of the Opry Widow, not just as the ex-wife of a legendary songwriter, but as a matriarch of the Grand Ole Opry who had weathered unimaginable storms and was still standing. For nearly 50 years, she was a fixture on that stage, her membership a symbol of her resilience and her dedication to the home that, in many ways, saved her life. Her personal tragedies forged a deep commitment to supporting military veterans. Having lost her son in Vietnam, she understood their sacrifice in a way few could. She worked tirelessly with organizations like the Veterans Administration and helped raise funds for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. This work was quiet, sincere, and deeply personal, earning her the Tennessee Adjutant General's Distinguished Patriot Medal, the highest honor a civilian can receive. As one famous anecdote goes, a group of anti-war protesters came to her home, assuming a Gold Star mother would join their cause. In classic Jan Howard fashion, she respectfully affirmed their right to protest, but told them that if they ever came back, she'd be waiting with a .357 Magnum. It was a perfect encapsulation of her spirit, fiercely patriotic and fiercely protective of her own grief. Her autobiography, Sunshine and Shadow, became a bestseller, praised for its raw honesty. It was her story, on her terms, a final act of taking control of a narrative so often defined by pain. She offered a motto that summed up her hard-won philosophy: never let yesterday use up today. Jan Howard passed away on March 28, 2020 at the age of 91, the oldest living member of the Grand Ole Opry at the time. The vice president of the Opry, Dan Rogers, said it best. She was a force of nature in country music, at the Opry, and in life. We're all better for having had her in our lives. Her legacy isn't just in her hit singles or her songwriting. It's in the pioneering role she played for women in country music, proving an artist could be tough, direct, and vulnerable all at once. But most of all, her legacy lies in her incredible story of survival. She was a woman who lived through poverty, abuse, betrayal, and the loss of 3 children. Yet she continued to stand in the spotlight and sing. Her life was a testament to the idea that music isn't just an escape from pain, but a way to transform it, give it meaning, and share it with a world that is also, in its own way, full of sunshine and shadow.